Marissa Bennings begins her morning like any other, woken up by her alarm in a quiet house that still carries the weight of past tragedy. She goes through her usual routine, grabbing a quick cup of coffee, then heads out the door for work. She's a journalist, and despite the lingering sadness in her eyes, she tries to put on a professional face. When she arrives at the newsroom, she asks her colleague Barry about a document she needs for her assignment. He apologizes, admitting it isn't ready yet. Marissa takes a frustrated breath, but she thanks him before heading to a staff meeting. The day already feels slightly off, though she can't pinpoint why. Partway through the meeting, her son Toby quietly enters the office. He's a young cop on the local force, wearing a grave expression. Marissa, immediately sensing a disturbance, steps away from the group to see what's wrong. Toby's eyes brim with tears as he tells her the devastating news. Her other son, Michael, has been found dead. The words hang in the air, and Marissa remains still. Toby embraces her, sobbing onto her shoulder, but she doesn't cry. Instead, she wears a numb, vacant look, as though the gravity of loss hasn't yet broken through her armor. Toby then drives her to the morgue to identify Michael's body. When Marissa finally sees her son, pale, lifeless, lying on a cold slab, she can't bring herself to show emotion. As Toby tries one last time to console her, she gently shrugs him off and leaves. A short time later, a funeral is held for Michael, and the gathering of friends, family, and strangers carries an almost suffocating heaviness. Marissa sits stiffly, replaying the last conversation she ever had with her youngest son. Nearby, Toby attempts to manage his own grief and also look out for his mother, who seems determined to stay locked within herself. Then Marissa's attention is pulled to a lone figure standing off to the side, a young woman with a tense posture and a sorrowful expression. This is Paige, Michael's girlfriend, whom Marissa blames for leading him deeper into drug use. Marissa storms toward her, all of her raw pain fueling each step. Paige haltingly tries to explain that she's pregnant with Michael's child, but before she can finish, Marissa slaps her. Paige stumbles, then blurts out that she carries Michael's baby. Marissa instantly recoils, unable to believe her own anger has led her to strike a pregnant woman. A short while later, Marissa and Paige sit down together, awkwardly navigating the aftermath of that tense confrontation. Marissa apologizes, saying she didn't know Paige was pregnant. Paige shares that she and Michael had been trying to build a future together, even looking at a farmhouse in the countryside. They were planning to start a family once they had enough savings. Marissa struggles to understand how Michael, who had been troubled by addiction, could possibly afford those plans. Paige reveals that he was working with a local drug dealer named Ducky. According to Paige, Michael insisted he was doing well financially, though obviously it came from a source Marissa never would have approved of. That night, Paige goes home and begins searching through Michael's personal belongings, determined to learn more. Hidden inside a box, she finds heroin, an unsettling discovery that makes her realize just how deep Michael's involvement in the drug world must have been. The next morning, Marissa meets Toby to discuss Michael's death. Toby explains that everything points to a fight breaking out among dealers or users, and that Michael was likely dealing drugs with Ducky. Toby warns his mother not to let guilt consume her, then comments on her smoking habit. Though she had tried to quit once, she started again, claiming it helps calm her nerves. In a rare, tender moment, Toby asks if he can take a drag too, a small gesture that underscores how grief unites them in their old habits. Toby promises he'll investigate Ducky and see if he can locate the dealer. Paige, meanwhile, tries repeatedly to call Ducky, but she never hears back. She becomes increasingly worried that he could be dangerous or, at the very least, hiding crucial information. At the same time, Marissa attempts to reclaim her normal life by returning to work. Her boss gently reminds her that she took months off after her husband Frank died, and he suggests she do something similar now. But Marissa insists she needs to keep busy, believing her job, the pursuit of truth, might offer her a lifeline through this fresh wave of despair. Her boss praises her skill, calling her the best writer on his staff, but hints that she must also face her own pain. That evening, Marissa meets Toby at a bar for a few rounds of pool. They chat about next steps, and Toby reaffirms that he'll track down Ducky. Somewhere else in the city, Paige tries to sleep in her modest home, only to be awakened by a noise. And Paige then sees two masked men breaking in. Heart pounding, she grabs the heroin that Michael left behind and scrambles out a window, just seconds ahead of the intruders. After escaping, she has nowhere else to turn but Marissa's house. When Toby drops Marissa off later that night, she finds Paige asleep on her couch. Paige wakes and shows her the drugs, explaining that this batch is dirty heroin, particularly lethal, and the reason many people in their community have been overdosing. Toby arrives soon after, promising to bring the stash to the station for evidence. Paige, still rattled by the home invasion, stays behind. Marissa offers her a blanket, and the two women lie awake for a long time, each trying to reconcile their anger toward each other with the unspoken truth that they've both lost Michael, in one way or another. The next morning, Paige tells Marissa she hasn't been feeling well. She's pregnant, after all, but lacks the funds to keep up with her doctor's appointments. Moved by guilt, or perhaps by maternal instinct, Marissa insists on driving her to the clinic. After dropping Paige off, Marissa heads to a nearby bar, where she drowns herself in alcohol while replaying an old voicemail from Michael on her phone. The message is brief, but tender. Michael telling his mom he loves her. Marissa listens again and again until she's so drunk that she misses Paige's calls. Paige, stranded outside the hospital, runs into Gina, Toby's wife. Gina, noticing Paige's distress, offers her a ride. She is warm and open, the opposite of Marissa's current state. Paige accepts, recognizing she's out of options. When Marissa finally returns home, drunk and barely coherent, Paige is waiting for her. Anger flares up again, since Marissa had promised to pick her up. But Paige's frustration dissolves somewhat when Marissa shows her a photo of Michael. Paige reveals that Michael often talked about his mother, saying how she used to be cheerful and outgoing before losing her husband. They sift through old photos, remembering better days. Then Marissa heads to bed, leaving Paige awake to do her own research online about Michael's demise. The next day, in a moment of relative calm, Marissa and Paige decide to go baby shopping. Still, Paige can't fully focus on picking out onesies and baby books. Her phone keeps lighting up with messages. Finally, she receives word from a man named Jeremy, who claims his grandfather witnessed Michael's murder. In a swirl of excitement, Paige tells Marissa they have a lead, so they race to meet him. Jeremy explains that his grandfather saw Michael running for his life, chased by people in a white van, and that's when he was shot. This detail resonates with Paige, who believes Ducky might be able to confirm or deny the story. Later, Marissa and Paige attend a grief support group where a woman named Lori shares a heartbreaking account of losing her daughter to addiction. After the meeting, Paige chooses to walk home alone, hoping to coax more information out of Ducky by texting him. Marissa, meanwhile, offers Lori a ride. During that drive, Marissa delicately asks whether she can interview Lori, both as a journalist and a mother struggling to make sense of her own child's death. Lori deflects, pointing out that sharing personal stories in a support group doesn't mean she wants them broadcast. However, she does bring Marissa to a supervised injection site, explaining that her daughter might still be alive if she'd known such safe spaces existed. At the injection site, Marissa unexpectedly spots Ducky among the people gathered for medical supervision. Recognizing her, he bolts. Marissa, spurred on by a mix of journalistic instincts and maternal rage, chases him through an abandoned truck yard. Adrenaline courses through her, but Ducky catches her off guard and knocks her down. Pinning her to the ground, he demands to know why she's after him. Marissa accuses him of killing Michael, which makes Ducky recoil. He insists that Michael was his best friend, that he tried to protect him from more dangerous players in the drug trade. Ducky describes a man with a distinctive tattoo on his hand who drives a white van, asserting that this nameless figure is the one who pulled the trigger on Michael. Finally, perhaps out of pity, he lets Marissa go. While this is happening, Paige visits Gina's house, but finds no one there. As she waits outside, Toby arrives and asks what she's doing. Paige simply says she came to see Gina, and Toby invites her in to wait. Later, Marissa arrives at Toby's place, bruised from her altercation with Ducky, and recounts what happened. Toby chastises her recklessness, reminding her that drug dealers can be extremely dangerous. Marissa, driven by grief, seems unbothered by the risk. Not long afterward, Paige receives another urgent text from Jeremy. His grandfather just remembered something new. Paige follows the lead to an abandoned house, hoping Ducky might be there. Instead, she discovers Ducky's lifeless body. The scene is grim. Whether it's suicide or murder isn't immediately clear, but he's gone either way. Shaken, Paige checks Ducky's phone and uncovers a frequently dialed number. Desperate for answers, she hurries to show Toby, who tries to reassure her before stepping out of the room to make a phone call. Left alone, Paige calls the suspicious number from Ducky's phone, and a chilling realization sets in when she hears a phone ringing somewhere in Toby's house. She follows the sound down into the basement, discovering the very device that had been sending messages to Ducky. Suddenly, Toby appears. Paige, connecting the dots, understands that Toby has been complicit in Michael's involvement, or possibly even covering up the murder. As Paige confronts him, Toby pleads for her to calm down, but she scrambles to escape. A scuffle on the narrow basement steps sends Paige tumbling. She hits the ground hard, unmoving, clearly hurt. In a moment of panic, Toby stages the scene to look like Paige overdosed, injecting her with the dirty heroin. By the time Marissa arrives at the hospital, the doctors have saved the baby, but couldn't save Paige. Once again, Marissa is forced to watch a young life slip away. Toby tearfully insists that Paige overdosed on the same lethal drugs that killed Michael. But Marissa can't help feeling a sense of déjà vu and mounting suspicion. Life lurches forward. Days later, Gina discovers traces of blood on the basement stairs and a necklace she recognizes as Paige's. Horrified, she approaches Marissa, apologizing for entering her home without invitation, but too frightened to confront Toby herself. She shows Marissa the evidence, urging her to investigate. The next day, Toby stops by Marissa's house to pick up what's left of the heroin stash. She questions him about Paige's death, indirectly probing for a confession. Toby continues to maintain the overdose story, urging Marissa to see a doctor if she's overwhelmed. After he leaves, Marissa follows him at a distance, eventually trailing him to a train station. Once on board, she watches Toby meet a man with a tattoo on his hand, the exact detail Ducky had given her earlier. Toby hands this stranger a suitcase, concluding some sort of handoff. When the man leaves, Marissa quietly sits beside Toby and waits. Toby, visibly unraveling, begins to confess. He breaks down in tears, saying he never wanted any of this to happen. He only wanted to control a situation that spiraled beyond his grasp. He admits he and Michael were caught up in the drug trade. Michael needed money. Toby was supposed to be the responsible older brother. Instead, he facilitated dangerous deals. Unable to protect Michael or Paige, Toby has led them both to disaster. Marissa listens wordlessly, her features etched in a mix of sorrow and quiet understanding. In that instant, she grasps the impossible choice before her. If she exposes Toby, she loses her only remaining son and faces the guilt of having withheld justice for Michael and Paige. If she conceals what he's done, she's complicit in a cover-up, betraying everything she stands for as a journalist and the memory of her youngest child. That night, she stops at a bar, but in a small gesture of self-control, orders water instead of hard liquor. She sets up her laptop and writes a comprehensive article detailing the entire tragedy. Michael's addiction, Toby's involvement, Paige's murder, and the broader corruption that allowed it all to happen. It's a scathing indictment, not only of Toby, but of a system that failed people like Michael and Paige. When she's done, she takes the article to her boss. He reads it in somber silence, reminding her that publishing could destroy Toby's life. Giving the pages back to Marissa, he tells her to take a week to decide. Days later, Gina and Toby come by to pick up the baby, Michael's child, now an orphan. Marissa hands the infant over, watching Toby's face, torn between love for her grandchild and revulsion at Toby's betrayal. After they leave, she notices the draft of her article lying on the table. Next to it is a pack of cigarettes and a book of matches. She picks up a single match, staring at the paper that could bring Toby to justice while also ensuring she would lose him forever. In that lingering moment, she strikes the match. A bright, flickering flame dances in her hand, reflected in her eyes. The film leaves us wondering whether she burns the truth and spares her son, or walks away and lets the fire of justice consume Toby's life. It's a heart-wrenching choice, embodying the central theme of how far a mother is willing to go to protect her child, even if that child is undeniably guilty of terrible deeds. Despite this morally fraught finale, The Good Mother carries a certain nostalgic appeal for fans of 90s thrillers, where the menace is spelled out in bold lines. A man with a tattoo, a deadly white van, and a secret phone that triggers the final confrontation. There's a vintage vibe in how the plot hinges on small, seemingly innocuous details that explode into revelation, much like classic Harrison Ford or Tom Clancy-inspired films. Yet, it's also a family drama, touching on opioid addiction, grief, and the desperate attempts of a mother trying to reconnect with a child lost to his own demons. Some viewers feel this blend of genres, thriller and drama, doesn't always gel seamlessly, causing moments of disjointed pacing. Others appreciate how it confronts the opioid crisis with stark honesty, weaving a story that questions the lines between justice, love, and moral responsibility. In the end, The Good Mother asks its audience to consider a fundamental dilemma. Would you betray your remaining son's secrets to honor the memory of the one you lost? Or would you protect him and silence the truth, hoping no more blood will be spilled? That final image of Marissa holding the match, her face flickering with indecision, leaves us with the kind of open-ended conclusion that stirs debate well after the credits roll. It's a dark reflection on how easily motherly devotion can clash with the unbending demands of justice. And with that, the audience is left to decide which path Marissa might truly take when the flame finally meets the page.